Welcome everyone who's joining us today. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from.
I wrote a sticky note and put it on my computer that says, "Be the sponge."
There are some school-specific sponsorships which make you feel like more inclined towards them.
While you're in MBA, you have unprecedented access to a lot of people, be it alums, recruiters, or your professors, your career services. Make the most out of your time, talk to people, get a clear understanding of what you want to go into.
All right. Hey, everyone. We are live now. I mean, I've seen the MBA Spotlight live video many, many times now, but I think today it felt very real. And I felt like I was in a club, but instead of like music or hip hop music, they were talking about the GMAT and MBA Spotlight, which is a pretty cool club to be. All right, cool. I'm Souvik. I'm a Michigan Ross alum, have been a part of GMAT Club for many years, although I haven't done a lot of YouTube videos recently, something that I'm trying to change. I'm here with Maria and Diana, who are my friends and also regular contributors to the GMAT Club YouTube channel. Thanks, Maria. Thanks, Diana. Diana, I'll start with you. For that one person who doesn't know who you are, who are you?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Souvik. And by the way, it's so great to be with you and Maria. Hope you're both doing well too. Hi, everybody. My name's Diana Economy, and for many years, I was the head of admissions at Michigan Ross. In fact, I admitted Souvik, but now I actually work with GMAT Club, and my role at GMAT Club is to help connect you with schools and to connect schools with you. So looking forward to starting this conversation, answering any questions you have, and I can hand it off to Maria.
All right, thanks, Diana. I'm so excited to see you. I haven't seen you in your new role. So, hi everyone. My name is Maria Wickvila. I'm a Harvard Business School graduate and the founder of ApplicantLab.com, which is a website that democratizes access to the world's best admissions consulting advice, but for a small fraction of the price.
All right. So MBA Spotlight is coming up next week. And one of the things that I was getting a lot of messages about was how do I make the best out of this event? And I was responding to these questions, but I felt like, okay, how do people really network with schools? How do folks get their faces known, ask the right questions? So I thought it would be good to get both sides of the coin. Maria, you have helped thousands of people getting into business schools, and Diana, you have admitted thousands of people into business schools. So this is like the ideal panel. So I wanted to start with you, Diana. Why network with schools at all? Like, why do you need to get yourself out there? But also, tell us the inside scoop. As an admissions director, what kind of notes do you take for applicants? Tell us how you think of networking efforts.
Yeah, I'm really glad we're talking about this now too, because I see that not only is Spotlight next week, but schools have got so many different events coming up, online, in person. They've got student ambassadors for you to talk to, a lot of different ways to connect and engage with the school. And there are some things to keep in mind as you're engaging. So to answer your question about how do schools think about the networking, really the simple answer is the events that schools are putting on, or the participation, for example, in an event like MBA Spotlight, is for you, right? It is for you to get to know the schools, to ask your questions, to get them answered so that you can make an informed choice about which schools to apply to, or ultimately which schools to attend. So, one misconception that I want to make sure I clear for us is this is not a numbers game, right? This is not about if I go to so many events for a given school, then I'm going to have this much better chance to get in. It doesn't work that way, right? It really comes down to you going to the events that make the most sense for you to get the most out of them. At Spotlight next week, the format is going to be Q&A. So you'll hear from the schools for a few minutes. They'll share information about what their school is about, just for the first few minutes, a couple things that differentiate the school or about their process. And then they're going to open it up to you and your peers to ask the questions that are going to be the most relevant to you. So, get prepared, take a look at the school's websites of the sessions that you're attending. Think about the information that would be important for you to know in order to better understand that school. Oh, I think you're on mute, Souvik.
Sorry, I have the habit of just being on video conferences. I think I now mute myself on pure instinct. So, Diana, to follow up, what kind of information do you keep a track of from the networking efforts that folks do?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I know you all come here for transparency, and I'm going to give you transparency. I'm going to give it to you from my perspective that I think applies to most schools, but feel free to check with schools. Schools don't care how many events that you attend, right? And in terms of the notes, Souvik, so this kind of ties to this. You're in a virtual environment. It's very difficult to keep track of candidates. I would say maybe in an in-person environment, maybe you kind of get to know a few more people a little bit better. But let's say a school gets a few thousand applicants. I would say as an admissions officer, you maybe remember like 20 or 30. It's very difficult to remember a candidate one way or another. But what I would say is this in terms of like maybe the implications of your networking on the admissions process. In the application itself, we have access to which events you attended, how many events you attended. We actually even have a box at Michigan Ross that says, how have you gotten to know this school? Did you attend any events? Did you talk to any student ambassadors? What did you learn about that school? That really is your chance to tell the school kind of the ways that you've been able to research. It's not quantity though. It really is just getting to know that you've had some opportunity to inform yourself and understand what that looks like. I will say, so Souvik, when you're asking about notes, there's the inference that there's a judgment around it. If that box on an application is blank, that surprises me. Right? Because for a school that has 100 to 200 virtual events per year and 300 student ambassadors, you didn't attend anything. You didn't come to MBA Spotlight. You didn't come to anything. Now, that is just something that's going to stick in my head. When I get to your interview, if you've been invited to interview, I may see that you don't have a very good answer for why my school, because you haven't really done maybe some of the research. So it isn't about the notes that we take, Souvik. I think it is just doing due diligence like a school would expect you to do with the consulting firms that you're interviewing with for your internship or the tech firms that you're going to interview with. It's a precursor kind of indicator on your judgment, and it's a major investment. So we want to know that you feel well informed and that you can make an educated decision about the school for you.
That makes sense. I do have a follow-up question, but I'm going to keep that after the question that I want to ask Maria first. Maria, when applicants come to you to ask this question, like, okay, I do have maybe some questions to ask some alums or some current students, or sometimes maybe I don't. I just want to write my essays and get done with it. What are some of your suggestions on what are the best possible ways to network with schools?
So I think if we focus primarily first on this upcoming, the GMAT Club, the MBA Spotlight next week, where it is going to be admissions officers in sort of a one-to-many format, a couple of things that I would keep in mind. First of all, I don't think at this point in the cycle, no one's going to expect you to have memorized the school's elective curriculum and which professor is publishing which thing. But I do think if there is a school that is of interest to you and you're planning on going to an event and at least asking some sort of a question, maybe do just a little smidge of research prior to jumping onto that Q&A. You know, the time is very limited and there are going to be probably hundreds of people in the session. So a couple of things, like don't ask a very simple question like, oh, where is Ross located? Is it in Arizona? And it's like, no, it's in Michigan. So some very basic questions like that. And you'd be surprised. Sometimes people, because there's this idea of quantity over quality that I think sometimes gets into applicants' heads, they're like, I'm just going to ask 20 questions and then that's going to make them notice me. But there is such a thing as bad attention, right? The old marketing adage of there's no such thing as bad press. I don't think that necessarily applies to an environment like this. So in terms of the questions, you know, ask questions. Here's how I think the ideal question is one that provides an insight into the program that is not obvious, but that is also of interest to a large number of applicants. So don't ask a question that is so broad that a quick 5-second Google search could have answered it, but also don't ask a question that is completely specific to you, where you're like, well, my blood type is O positive and I have a 620 on the GMAT and 6 years of experience as a, like, what are my chances of getting in? Do not do that. Because first of all, if they could do that over a quick video chat, their admissions process would not exist if it were that easy. And second of all, like, you just seem really selfish, right? This is an environment for them to reach out to you as a student, but also the community at large. And so if you try to make it all about me, and my application and my background, I do think it's going to leave a bad a bad taste in someone's mouth. So the sorts of questions that you can ask could be things around, you just sort of ask yourself, like, okay, what, maybe imagine, like, okay, if you've got some other friends who are applying, like, what are some questions that a group of us might have? So for example, what are some new initiatives that the school is planning for this year? You know, I know a lot of schools, I've just finished a week-long conference visiting a couple of top business schools, and we heard about how, you know, sustainability is going to start to be an even bigger focus at a lot of these programs, digital, AI, classes on AI, things like that. So those could be great, because that could, especially if other people in the audience have those career interests, that could really be a way for a school to differentiate itself, and for you to say, wow, you know, this school really is going to offer the sorts of things I want to learn. So I think that's one of the first questions I would ask, especially if it's admissions. I think it also depends who the audience is. If it's like an admissions person, questions about the program, I think are great. And versus if you're talking to students in the future, and we can sort of pivot to that a little bit later, but maybe more questions around social or club, you know, other types of aspects of the program would be more appropriate.
Makes sense. You mentioned bad behaviors. That was my follow-up. So Diana, I fully understand it's hard to keep a track of the thousands of applicants that you meet. But when I was doing consulting recruiting, and you have all of these networking events in Michigan, and I'm positive every other business school, and you have the concept of like the circle of networking death, right? Where there is one person from like McKinsey, Bain, BCG at the center, and there's like a group of, you know, business school folks trying to ask them questions, right? Just for anyone who doesn't know what a circle of networking death is. But the general advice is to not be noticed for the wrong reasons, right? So, but when you are noticed for the wrong reason, what do you do? Do you have like a filter? Do you have, okay, look out for this person, or do you not do anything at all?
Yeah, I mean, it really is hard in the moment, whether you're doing it online or in person, to make note of that person's name. They may have a common name. You're only seeing their first name, right? Like it just says Maria, right? Applicant Lab or Souvik right now, right? So I don't know that I'd be able, Souvik, if you said something to like note that it was Souvik, and then I was in this moment, and then you're one of the 17 Souviks that applied, like it's too difficult to track that all the way down through your application, especially this many months in advance of when an application even appears for an admissions officer. So to be totally honest, it really is hard to, you know, it's hard to stand out. That said, you know, in terms of some of the bad behaviors, Maria mentioned one of them. I think some, you know, asking things that are too personalized. Now, it's okay to say, you know, I only have a few years of work experience. I've only been out of undergrad for a year or two. You know, what advice do you have for somebody who's only out for a year or two? That's different than saying, you know, I work for my family business. I've been doing it for 2 years. I have this thing's like, how likely am I to get in? So it's okay to ask, you know, admissions-based questions that are going to help you understand whether you're a fit, again, whether you should apply, right? Maybe somebody says, you know, no, like this doesn't work for us. Typically with years of experience, it's, you know, it's going to be an answer that's something along the lines of it depends. But so asking those things. So Souvik, the other thing, and I'm glad you mentioned this, because now there's more in-person events. So you referenced this circle of death, which is basically one admissions officer with 20 people that could be standing around them. The reason it's called a circle is actually very relevant. And I want to mention this, right? So if you're asking a question, right, you get a chance to ask one question, right? So when you're in this situation, you ask one question, not 5, because there's 20 other people, right? And this also is online too. You get one question. If you get asked, you get one question. And then when you're done with your question in an in-person event, you want to be inclusive of those who are around you, which is to say, somebody standing next to you might have a question, and you want to actually adjust your body language that allows that person a chance to make eye contact with the person, so that you're not physically blocking them, because it just shows a little bit of lack of awareness. So that might make sense, given that in-person events are coming back, that we talk a little bit about that.
That makes total sense. Like we had strategies during recruiting on how to build others up, how to gracefully exit the circle. So yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. I want to come back to, you know, in-person versus virtual networking, especially being in campus. But, you know, but before jumping into that, Maria, quick question for you, and maybe Diana, you can weigh in as well. When you are asking questions to, let's say, a student or an alum, how do you find them? There are, you know, 500 students in a class in an average school. You have a very interesting concept called the resume twin. So we can get into that a little bit, but I'm very curious. What's your go-to? Just find anybody, just search on LinkedIn and just spam people.
Just wander around the campus and throw rocks in random directions, and when the rock hits someone, that's the no, I'm just kidding. So first of all, two things. A lot of programs have started and have been developing formal student ambassador programs, right? So lots of schools, if you go to the website, they'll say, click here to find your student ambassador. In some cases, it might only be a handful of students. In some cases, it's a very sophisticated online system where you can filter by geography or professional interest or what have you. I think the most fruitful, because time is limited, the most fruitful student types of engagements that you can have are with people who have similar professional interests to you. Because at the end of the day, while the professional aspect of business school is not the only aspect of business school, it's probably the main reason you're going to go. And so if you are interested in, say, management consulting as a career, or tech or entrepreneurship or finance, and if you only have a little bit of time, reach out to a student from one of those clubs.
Yeah.
And try to see, you mentioned my concept of the resume twin. And what I mean by the resume twin is, you have a resume right now as an applicant. There's a chance that somebody 2 to 3 years ago had a very similar resume to you. So if you find someone whose resume, their pre-MBA resume, looks an awful lot like your resume now, that's a pretty good bet that the school is open to people with a background like yours. You know, Diana mentioned, for example, when someone is very young, maybe they only have 2 years of experience, but maybe it's at a family business. And so their 2 years of experience has been tremendously impactful. And so, you know, not all 2 years of experience are created equal. So if you find someone else who was also running a family business, et cetera, et cetera. So you're going to want to try to find someone who's your resume twin. And then that's also beneficial. So if you then reach out to, say, the finance club and you say, look, I'm currently working in tech as a product manager, but I'm interested in investment banking. You know, here's a quick thing on my background. Is there anyone else in the club who was able to make this career jump?
Right.
Because that not only helps your application, and not only helps your career vision and your application seem feasible instead of like wackadoodle, it also gives you the confidence, because a lot of time right now, you know, we're recording this right now in June, and June is the time when a lot of schools are starting to really ask for that final tuition deposit. And this is the time where the financial rubber hits the road. You know, you have to put your money where your mouth is. I'm going to throw a million metaphors together. And people start panicking and they start saying like, oh my gosh, Maria, this is a $200,000 degree. And I'm like, yeah, it is. And if you haven't already done that, all of that homework in advance, that, yeah, this degree is going to be a lot of work, but it is totally going to be worth it.
Yeah.
Then you're not even going to feel comfortable. Even if you get in, you also want that feeling like, yeah, you know what, this program, their career services office, their consulting club, their finance club, they can help me make this pivot or this advancement that I want to make. It helps them, it helps you, and it's so useful to do.
Awesome. Diana, I want to ask you a slightly different flavor of this question. So I see networking with schools having two separate effects. The first one is, you know, from an admissions perspective, I want to be able to tell the school that, look, I engaged with your school, right, as a way to get in, right? The second one is from an applicant perspective, is the interview or, you know, talking to admissions students, alums, giving the applicant an idea on whether it's the right school, whether it's the right fit. Now, we did I know you led a bunch of data analysis on how networking and reaching out to alums help applicants seal the deal and make a school decision, whether it's applying or actually attending when offered an admission. Where do you see networking fall more strongly? Do you see networking firmly as like, no, this is like more applicable as a way to get in, or more applicable as a way to select whether you want to attend the school or not? And are your networking strategies or your questions going to be different for those two swim lanes?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned this, because this is definitely a bit of a marathon and not a sprint, right? It's not about, you know, talking to as many people as you can within 2 weeks' time, because the reality is, as you start to go to more and more events, and schools are doing a lot this summer, right, to connect with candidates, your questions are going to start to evolve. Your understanding of the program is going to start to evolve. You know, the reality is, you may not fully understand, I don't know, do I want to go into consulting or investment banking or what right now, right? So you're still perhaps formulating what your post MBA goals are, and things like that are going to start to evolve as you start to learn more about the program.
Right.
So you're going to want to pace yourself. I think right now, because there are so many opportunities to connect and engage with schools, and because even though student ambassadors are helpful, they are in an internship. You can imagine how difficult it is if you've never worked in consulting and you're on your first week of a consulting internship and 17 people reach out because they want to talk to you. Students want to be responsive to you and they want to answer your questions. They are settling into their internships right now. And in some ways, it might even be better a little later this summer, maybe even into early September, once they're kind of settled back into their school routine, which they're a little bit more familiar with, to connect then. That's not to say that you can't reach out this summer. It's just be mindful of what is happening in a student's world right now too. And a lot of the students, of course, are interning.
Right.
Well, I would pace yourself, because you're going to have leading up to the application. And then, right, if you apply and let's say you get invited to interview, you might have new or different questions about that part of the process. And then maybe you get into a few schools, and again, your questions are going to evolve. So make sure you're keeping track of the people that you're talking to, what you learn from them. And this is important and not something that everybody does. How you felt about that conversation, meaning just sort of like on a scale of 1 to 5, how energized were you about that conversation? Do you want to talk to more people at that school, or were you somewhat bored or slightly turned off by, I don't know, the tone or the energy or something that just didn't sit well with you?
Yeah.
Those are some of the early indicators of fit. And just the last thing I want to mention there, Souvik, is just when you start to talk to people, if you talk to people who are your resume twin, you're probably going to hear kind of the story that you're hoping to hear. At some point in your journey, you need to start to talk to people who aren't your resume twin, but who are ultimately going to be classmates. Maybe somebody who doesn't share your geographic background or otherwise. Are they reflecting on the program in a similar way to somebody who does exactly what you want to do?
Yeah.
That's your classmates. And could you see yourself with this really diverse set of classmates? That's why you're kind of keeping track a bit of like who you're talking to and the reflections on those conversations beyond just what you're learning about the program.
That is such an awesome insight, because I made my Ross decision purely based on conversations with people. And it was odd because Ross is such a, extroverted school, and there is so much of sports and stuff like that. But I actually spoke to students who were not that, who were introverted, and they were like, yeah, man, like this is pretty crazy sometimes, but this is how I deal with it. And that kind of honesty and being candid really, really helped me actually make that decision. So awesome. Maria, quick question. You mentioned about the pitfall of doing too much, quality versus quantity. When you have an appropriate quality and quantity, what are some of the best ways to actually weave that into your application, essays and things like that?
I am happy to answer that. Can I just very quickly add on to what Diana just said about like how you go through your journey? I try to think of it she's absolutely right. Like, you're not going to ask the same questions as an applicant as you are going to like the week before your interview as once you've been accepted. So one way to maybe think about it is to think of it in terms of perhaps your profile, and then your personality, and then your profession. So the first question is the school going to help me get to where I want to be professionally? If the answer is no, then maybe you don't really waste your time. Then understanding that lots of schools have really good professional career services offices and all kinds of coffee chats with private equity. I mean, everyone's got those things. Then ask yourself, okay, where's my personality going to be a better fit? Because schools do have different cultures. There's no way around it. Thankfully, usually they're good cultures and they're supportive cultures, but that can differ pretty dramatically. So then you're going to want to start to get a sense of, okay, where do I feel more at home, right? I love Diana's idea of keeping a little note of not just like the pragmatic aspects of the conversation, but how did I feel when I talked to this person? And if you talk to a few people and you've got the same kind of ick in your stomach, or if your tummy glows like a Care Bear after you've talked to them, like that's really good data to keep note of, right? Because that's a good sign. And then I think once you're in, don't lose sight of the fact that at the beginning, you're selling them on you. you want it to be a good fit, but if you turn them off and you don't even get the offer, then there's no point. So then once you've got that offer, that's when you can start asking the harder questions around, okay, professionally, when does the consulting club start doing its case interview workshops? And, how many people were able to get that internship in venture capital or whatever have you. But your question, Souvik, was, assuming that you've done some of this appropriate networking, where would it go into the application? So Diana mentioned that a lot of the schools in the application forms themselves have a whole section where sometimes it's just a little text box where you can just type in a few notes, and other schools have like 1,000 check boxes of, here are the 4 million online things we've done and the in-person things, and click all the things that you've done. So first of all, most schools will give you a chance to mention that. If you're watching this right now and you're saying, oh my gosh, Maria, I did go overboard. I did focus on quantity over quality. Maybe don't mention everyone you talk to, right? If you kind of went a little nutso and talked to 70 people, maybe don't say I talked to 70 people, because you might seem a bit odd. So you can put that there. But the other places where I would put this are any school that has a Why Our School essay. That's a great place to put that. Or especially or a career switch. If you're trying to make some sort of a career switch, or if there's a place where, here's for me sort of an ideal place where you could insert a student interaction into an essay. It would be something along the lines of, I spoke to such and such person in the Education Technology Club, and I said, look, I know someone who can come and speak at your conference. Is that something that you would like? And they were like, yes. So it's not only showing that you've done the homework, but it's that you're already thinking ahead to, what is my contribution going to be to the school, right? Going to the school is not a one-way street where you take, and sit back and get the nice job at the end. Hopefully you're also the sort of person who also gives and contributes. So hopefully you're thinking right now about, what can I contribute? And if you can get a current student or a recent alum to say, you know what, if you were to come and you were to start a rugby team, that would be cool. I think people would be really into it. Then that helps give credibility that you're not just pulling ideas out of the air. Similarly, for career switchers, if you, let's say you were, I don't know, a Teach for India teacher, and you want to go into, I don't know, product management at a tech firm, just to pull a, I don't know, I just made up this example. Souvik. Anyway, that's Souvik's background for those of you who don't know. If you actually talk to someone who made that switch in the tech club at Ross, and they say, well, yeah, Souvik, actually there are several teachers who have all gotten great internships in the education branch of Apple or the education arm of Google, and here's what that might look like. Then if you can mention that, now I, as a reader, I'm like, okay, this person has a plan, and the plan is a reasonable one, and they've vetted that plan.
And, also, this is what I did, very similar stuff on vetting. This was not just to tell schools how I will contribute or where I will fit, but also to suss out, is this a reasonable plan at all in the first place, right? And also, like, there are schools like Wharton who would explicitly ask you how you would contribute to the campus. But even if they don't, it's probably a good idea to weave at least some of that in when you're explaining why this school, because I don't think you feel like contributing unless you feel a sense of community. So that's like a proxy way of saying that I think I belong here. Awesome. Thanks for that insight. So I've been trying to nudge this away, but I want to ask, Diana, how do you feel about folks visiting campus versus attending virtually? Is there a very clear preference from the school's perspective in how students should network with the school? But also on the other side, because I know, you have done a bunch of data analysis, is there a difference in applicant preference that you're seeing any trends for?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm glad you brought this up too, because there's so many different ways to get to know a school. And so I think there's this question of like, how, and is there a right way to get to know, right set of events to do? And the reality is, and I'll bring this back to when schools do events, it's for you, right? It really isn't for a school to say, well, you attended this many or this type, or you came to this one, and so I like you better. It just doesn't work that way. It's still about you getting to assess fit. There's probably a lot of you that have not been to Ann Arbor. If you'd like to visit Ann Arbor in advance of applying, you certainly can. And I'm sure schools like Michigan and others are going to have visit days. I will tell you, though, it's expensive. And so schools are not expecting you to visit campus. They are not. And then, in fact, I would say many candidates don't visit campus, and sometimes until after they're admitted, maybe for an admitted student weekend, because at that point you're meeting people who might otherwise be future classmates. And it's worth the investment to visit, because you're not only getting to know the place, you're not only getting to see the school, meet the professors and various things, but you're getting to meet other people who've been admitted to that program who are going to be a part of your network.
Right.
So it is not uncommon at all for people to not visit up until the admitted student weekend. And again, schools recognize how expensive it is in advance of that, even for the admitted weekend. Obviously, that's for you as well. So if you are in, the US and in the region of a school and they happen to have a visit day, great.
Yeah.
But I would say choose the methods that you are going to be most successful with. And that could be on-demand content that you watch at 2:00 in the morning, could be a live event that you watch from your house online. It's totally up to you. I think just find what works well with your schedule.
Hey, Maria.
And I just want to add. So when I was volunteering with the admissions office, when I was at HBS, which is how I got into this whole world, never in a million years anticipated. So many years later, this would be my life. I was just doing it as a volunteer thing. But one of the insights I got that was really great was that they said, look, we want this process to be as absolutely fair as possible. And so, I think the schools want to be very cognizant of the fact that not everyone has the resources, the time, the money. Not everyone can just take 3 days off of work and fly to Ann Arbor, even though Ann Arbor is lovely, especially at this time of year. It's probably gorgeous. I've only been to Ann Arbor in summer, and I was like, this is beautiful. But I live in LA for a reason. I'm not a winter person. But anyway, they want to make clear that you don't get an advantage just because you have the money and the time to go to a school. So just realize that it's like they really want to try to actively combat any bias that comes into that process from that. I will say, however, sort of my own gut feel is if you live within, say, a 2 to 3 hour drive of a school and you don't go, I do think that that's a little bit, you might not be able to take 3 days off of work to fly across the country or to fly to another country, across the country or to another country, but you could probably take an afternoon off of work. Right. And drive. So if you're say you're living in like the Boston area and you're applying to Dartmouth, Tuck, it's a 3 hour drive. Like, I do think that is a reasonable ask. I would prefer to see someone making that little bit of effort. I think I was recently in my conference this week. I was attending Columbia Business School, and they sort of jokingly said, like, if someone lives in New York and they can't even be bothered to take the A train or whatever, the subway line, like if they can't even be bothered to take a 20-minute subway ride up to come visit us, like, yeah, you might scratch your head a little about that.
Yeah.
So I would give that one little caveat, but otherwise, please don't worry about it. They intentionally do not want to introduce bias.
So I was in not-for-profits. I had no money to visit any schools, or so I thought. Like, maybe I could have, but I was truly jealous of people who did, and I know people who did. So I don't think, like, if you are an international applicant, especially if you need a visa, which needs like a months of a heads up, and especially right now, you can't even get a visa and visit the school in the same year. So it's not even like a possibility anymore if you're just thinking about going to school. But schools come to you. So, I was in Mumbai when I was in India. And I visited Ross. Ross came to Mumbai. Thak came to Bangalore. So I went to Bangalore or Hyderabad, one of those. And like if most and ton of people did, like, flew in from different cities. So if you live in the US and probably you're in the same coast or you're in the Midwest area and you still can't visit, that's kind of sort of unreasonable to me. Not just from like a school's perspective of the schools trying to feel that, like, how dare you not visit my campus, but from like, your stories are going to be so much better, and like, you would get the vibe of the community so much more strongly once you visit. And I think, Dan, to your point earlier, that sometimes when you talk to people, you kind of get a sense of the culture. That is so true. But there are also 500 people. You could be talking to someone who is like the opposite of your personality and feel that this is cool. That will never actually visit the school, because you'll probably never talk to just one person. So I recommend visiting schools if you are able to, and if you are nearby. we're kind of getting close to time, so I want to take maybe some minutes to just check for questions. There are a ton of ways to reach to people. You mentioned reaching out to ambassadors. There is also LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. So, I mean, I'll throw out my opinion. I do not recommend like trying to talk to someone through Instagram or Facebook, because that kind of could be reasonably thought of as stalking. Like Facebook and Instagram are personal social profiles. LinkedIn probably slightly more acceptable, but I want to hear what you all think. Maria?
I mean, I'll leave it to Diana because she's the one who was the former admissions officer. But yeah, I tell people do not interact because on any sort of social media platform that is primarily used for personal reasons, it's the difference between showing up at the admissions office to try to have a tour and showing up at the person's house and asking for a tour. Like, you wouldn't do that. That would be terrifying. So please leave people alone on their personal social media. I think LinkedIn, I do think it is personally, and this is just, I get a little bit, I think it's a little presumptuous for a candidate to try to link in with an admissions officer, but I also realize that some admissions officers might see that as a good connection building tool. But I don't know, like, definitely I think you can reach out through LinkedIn, but I don't know that I would try to link in with someone, because then it's like awkward, like, oh, what if I reject you? And now do I delete you from my, so, and definitely if you're going to do it, only do it with people who are like, prioritize it in terms of people who are in the admissions team, who are in outwardly facing roles in that team, right? The poor head of operations, sure, you can try to connect with him or her, but they might have a lot of other things on their plate, and outreach might not be one of those. Current students might be okay. Definitely, my opinion is I would not link in with professors, for example. I also think that feels a bit presumptuous. But Diana, you actually, this was your life for so many years. So what do you say?
I'm so glad you said that, because I actually wrote this LinkedIn point down too. I was like, we got to make sure we bring up LinkedIn. And I do think that there's different, maybe even generational preferences and things like that. You've got to remember that an admissions team might have 25 to 75-year-olds on the team, right? And so there's going to be different ways that people think about their social media or their online presence. But one of the things I would say with LinkedIn is, I don't typically link in with candidates. And part of the reason is I use my LinkedIn. Like, Maria, if you were an admitted student and you said, hey, I am LA or bust. I want to come to Ross, but I am LA or bust, and I want to be in the entertainment industry, and I'm specifically interested in these 2 or 3 different companies. I'm using my LinkedIn to get my best available data on alumni. And that's not to say that the school doesn't have it as well, but you guys know how often people change roles. So if I have to quickly, Maria, give you an alum to connect with at your extreme desired company in your preferred location, I don't want to have to sort through LA-based media folks and whatever to say, who do I actually know? I mean, obviously I can filter on my school in that instance, but sometimes there's other instances where I know people from other parts of my life that I'd be willing to introduce somebody to, but it's because I use that for my own personal and professional network. So I will say, I think it's starting to shift though, because admissions teams are sometimes sharing things on LinkedIn, but there's nobody is sharing anything on LinkedIn. There's no secrets happening there. Anything that anybody is sharing on LinkedIn is on their event webpage. It's on it's on the school social media. It's on all these different places. So you're not missing anything by not being linked in with a particular admissions officer. So I would say just be mindful. And then for social media, I mean, I think when you talk to a student or an alum, at the end of that conversation, if you want to ask them about, would it be okay if I, connect with you on LinkedIn? I think that's fine. And maybe you'll learn a little bit more probably from that student than you would an admissions officer, because they might be posting, I'm putting on the tech conference this weekend, or I'm doing this cool thing.
Right.
So I would say stick to students and peers and others that are going to be a part of that network and the longevity of your network when you think about your professional goals.
All right. Question around, like, is asking whether 14 or 15 years of work experience being too much, or whether that's a fit, is a really specific question. Maybe I can answer this one. I think it depends. I think if you say the words 14 and 15, of course you're being too specific. But I think if you frame it in a way that, hey, how do candidates or applicants or students with larger than average amount of work experience fare in your school? What type of industries do they typically go to? That's absolutely a fair game question. But Diana, what do you think?
Yeah, this is tricky because what you'll hear from admissions teams is going to be, it depends, right? It depends on your experience. There are people who have compulsory military service and they have X number of years in the military and then they go to work and then, and the like. It really is a bell curve around the median age of, experience, which is to say, 28 years old. I would say most people are within plus or minus 2 or 3 years of 28, just to kind of give some honesty to it. I would say how many people in a given class are older than 36? Maybe 5. Right. And I don't mean to be like, overstating. I don't know what the numbers are at any given school. So there were 5 people that had 14 to 15 years of experience that were admitted and accepted. Might you be one of those 5? Maybe. Right. And so I think admissions officers struggle a little bit because it is difficult sometimes for people with more experience. And I'll tell you, one of the things that I was researched at Ross was, how did candidates who had X number of years plus do with their internship search? How did candidates with less experience do with their internship search? The reality is both did pretty well. I would say probably people on the slightly younger end had slightly better internship outcomes than people with more years of experience. And in some cases, it's because some of the companies, they're like, you've been working for 15 years. Are you really ready to work 80 hours a week doing this thing I need you to do, like the 24-year-old is? Right? You wanted honesty and transparency. Like, whether no company is going to tell you that out loud, they might be thinking it behind the scenes, though, of you're not at the same life stage as your peer set that's starting in consulting or investment banking. And are you going to be a fit when you join that peer set and your boss is 5 years younger than you are?
Right.
Right. And so I don't mean to turn you off from business school, but I think it's so rare that we get a chance to be really honest when you have that many years of work experience. There are other program types that sometimes become a better format for you. So I wouldn't turn off your hopes there. I would just be really mindful of kind of how to put together an application that can be successful, given that you're a bit of an outlier in terms of what a traditional class profile might look like.
Right.
And someone like, oh, sorry.
Sorry, Maria, go ahead.
I was just going to say, someone like this is a perfect example of someone who should do networking with a professional club. Let's say this person with 14 to 15 years of experience is like investment banking or bust. I think that within 1 or 2, speaking to a couple of people who have done investment banking, they might learn some of the realities of it. And not just in terms of the recruiting, but even if they were to then get that job, what does that mean in terms of if they do have a family already, or if they are on the older side of things? Sometimes I say to people, sometimes the schools, when they reject you, they're actually kind of doing you a favor. And so, if you are 38 years old, do you really want to be in a classroom full of 27-year-olds? I say this to younger people, like, you're 27 now. How would you feel being in a classroom with 17-year-olds, right? They could be great, amazing 17-year-olds, but you're still going to feel a little like, it's not quite, we're at different places in our lives. And so if a school doesn't take you, they might be looking out for you. But as Diana said, what's great is that there are now so many new programs that are being launched. There are certificates in all kinds of different subjects. There are mini masters in data analytics, or masters in finance, or masters in, and they cater to all different experience levels. There's 1-year MBAs, there's part-time MBAs. So, don't give up hope. You can still probably get that education that you want, but also you have to be realistic about where you are in life. And also the final thing I'll add about someone who's older is, just like how 2 years of experience, it's not all created equal. Same thing with 14, 15 years of experience, right? Someone who's been in the military, as Diana said, I think that's a very different situation from someone who has sort of floundered, and if they've sort of reached, they're either at 14, 15 years of experience, you're either too senior for an MBA. Let's be honest. You're like, what are you doing here? Or if you're not yet at all senior after 14 years and you've just kind of been treading water professionally, maybe that's not the sort of professional profile that a school wants to put in front of their recruiters, because the recruiters come to campus and they spend that money and they buy the hors d'oeuvres and they've got high hopes, right? They want to get really great talent and really great employees out of that. So just something to keep in mind.
And I got a follow-up question about this, like, how do I get information about these specific programs in MBA Spotlight? Traditionally, we do MBA Spotlight for full-time programs, but although just tell us, give us that feedback, give schools that feedback that you want to hear about these programs, and we'll make it happen. Cool. So I'm getting one question that I'll just quickly take about GMAT versus GRE and differentiating a candidate more. This is not in the realm of today's scope, but we are talking about this in MBA Spotlight next week. And we have a session from the creators of the test. So feel free to come for that and ask that question. We are definitely out of time. So I want to get some last takes on maybe what's your top tip when it comes to networking? I'll start with you, Diana. I'll go to you, Maria, and then we will say goodbye.
Great. I just have one more tip that I think we haven't covered, and that is, when you're connecting with, students and ambassadors for the program, do schools have a way for students and alumni to give them feedback? Yes, right? So you should be mindful that anybody that you're talking to is somebody who could be making an impression on your candidacy. However, even though some schools do have that, it is not appropriate for you to ask that person to write a recommendation on your behalf to admissions. So let me take a half step back. Maria mentioned earlier, and this is a great point, schools are doing everything they can to reduce the amount of bias from the process. So I will be honest for you, even though Michigan Ross has a way for students and alums to fill out a form to be able to tell us about candidates they're meeting one way or the other, we don't look at it until after we have made admissions decisions at all. We don't look at it, right? And so what happens is after admissions decisions are made, we will go back to look at it, right? Okay, yep. And you're probably not surprised. I like this candidate. You like this candidate. The candidate's been admitted, right? There's sometimes, though, that you like the candidate and the candidate, it's a competitive process, doesn't get in. We're still mindful of those discrepancies. It's probably more any negative outliers. This person didn't show up on time. This person didn't have any good questions to ask. This person, was, pretty boring in terms of the way that they presented themselves. Honestly, like you can imagine if you're super busy and you're giving a half an hour of your time and somebody is monotone and just is asking questions that they could get from the website, it's not a great impression. So we might take a look at that. And if we've admitted that candidate, we might take a second look at them to see if what we had, lines up with what we were seeing. It's pretty rare for us to change admissions decisions because they tend to align with what we're hearing. And also because the majority of things that we get in that form are positive, right? It's not that many times when you're getting a lot of negative indicators, but it's don't push on getting somebody to write a recommendation for you. If they do, they do. If the school has that, they have it, and they're going to use it in the way that they do. But for the most part, it's not going to have a direct implication on your admission.
Maria, what's your last step?
Yeah, I love that point. Please don't harass 1,000 students and ask all of them to write you a letter of whatever. I think my final point is look, admissions officers are people too. And so if you're ever on the fence about is something appropriate, is it inappropriate, just put yourself in their shoes and say, and instead of, you're like, well, I've never been an admissions officer, Maria. Yeah, okay, but maybe you've hired someone for your company before. Maybe your group has hired a young college graduate, and ask yourself, if that graduate started stalking me on Instagram and started liking all my posts, would I be excited about that, or would I be a little creeped out? Would I want to get 40 emails a day from them asking questions like, where is your company located? Probably not. So whenever you're on the fence, just kind of put yourself in their shoes and just utilize some self-awareness. And I think that's a great place to start.
Awesome. I think we should do another version of this at different phases of the application, because I'm also getting a few questions around what does this advice change at all if you're in a wait list, for example. But I'll take an action item to set that up with you, Diana, and you, Maria. But this was awesome. Thank you so much for spending time with us this morning. Maria, you have a vacation coming up, so please have a lot of fun. And Diana, I will see you soon. And MBA Spotlight next week. Make sure to register if you haven't, which would weird me out a little bit. But yeah, please come. I hope all of you are registered. I'll see you guys next week. Bye.
See you at Spotlight.
Bye. Yeah, see you there. Bye. Thanks.